Hello, faithful, and welcome to the 49ers Plus podcast. I'm Al Moriello, and this is your source for the most objective 49ers discussion. Only smart takes, never any clickbait. And today we're going to be discussing some recent defensive signings by the 49ers, how it may impact the roster or the draft coming up in 2 weeks. A potential trade on the table for another defensive lineman for San Francisco. We're going to be shooting that down and talking about it. And then we're going to be going through draft prospects per position, per round, who the Niners could look at in the early to mid rounds. Remember, they don't have a 5th, 6th, 7th, or 3rd, but we'll break down no more than 4 prospects per round that the Niners could be targeting, where they really should be targeting certain players or positions in a certain round. This week's podcast will be only defense. Next week, we'll do the same exercise with offense. But let's jump right in. So I'm recording this on Saturday, April 11th. The end of this past week, the Niners made 2 defensive signings. First, it started on the D-line with defensive end Cam Sample, formerly of the Bengals, for the past 5 seasons, 6'3", 270 pounds. He was out all of 2024 with a torn Achilles. In his time with the Bengals, he made 4 starts, registered 7 sacks, and 85 total tackles. He played out his 4-year rookie contract with Cincinnati, was signed for 2025 to a 1-year deal that came in at about $1.2 million. As of this recording, the contract is not known yet, but I would assume something close to what he made in 2025 sounds pretty reasonable. Cam Sample is not the savior at defensive end, and the Niners need some help. May need another savior at defensive end once Bosa and Mykel Williams get healthy, but he is defensive end depth, rotational depth that the Niners need. And he is now their essentially 4th pass rusher on the roster, right? With Bosa, with Mykel, Sam O, Cam Sample. If you want to throw someone like Keon White as a defensive end, being more of a tweener, could play outside more. Sample is not going to be a starter. If these are these aren't going to be the 4 defensive ends that are going to be on the 53, because they're definitely going to draft another defensive end. It's just a matter of when. Sample could spell Mykel Williams, and Mykel tore his ACL on November 2nd, so he's a month behind Bosa, if you want to look at it that way in terms of recovery. Again, Sam-O started almost every, if not every game last season at defensive end. So if Bosa is healthy week 1, Sam-O is probably going to be the starter opposite him, depending on what the Niners do in the draft at defensive end. But in terms of an early down, maybe a second down edge setter, not going to give you a ton in terms of pass rush juice. And that's what the Niners are going to need to look at in the draft. I don't think they're going to be looking at another big body, 6'3", 280-pound defensive end, unless that player is ridiculously explosive. They have enough players in Bosa, in Mykel, in Sample, in Keon White that can set the edge. They need another pure burner, another pure pass rusher that can turn the corner, have the quarterback step up, and hopefully you're getting some penetration with some defensive tackles and Bosa or whoever on the other side collapsing that pocket. So good rotational piece. No guarantees on the roster. No guarantees on the 53. I think they're only, again, to me, the math works out with 4 defensive ends, 4 defensive tackles, and 2 tweeners. And right now, Keon White's a tweener for sure. And Mykel Williams is a tweener right now because he can kick inside, but he's not a pass rusher yet. Does not mean he can't develop into one. But this is along the lines of what I always thought the plan was going into free agency, bringing in a veteran, then following it up with a draft pick in either round 1 or round 2 to really fortify the defensive end spot. Does that mean that another defensive end is off the table in free agency? Of course not. Cam Sample, I'm sure he doesn't have a fully guaranteed contract. And even if it is, say, a $1.5 million, $1.7 million, and they can sign someone better, someone comes available, someone that they can trade for in the summertime, then Sample might be gone, or it could be Sam O. Who knows? They're not done at the defensive end position, certainly with the draft coming, but they're always looking to better the roster. Every team should be, right? And knowing how bad the pass rush was, I don't think anybody in the Niners front office looks at the roster and go, oh, well, we have 4 defensive ends now. We're going to have a 5th when we draft one. We're good. We're not going to look anymore. Not a chance. But they did bring in that veteran defensive end that I figured they would. And again, we're a couple weeks out from the draft. Secondary was addressed also with cornerback Jack Jones, 5'11", 185, has been on 3 teams in 3 years, or 4 years maybe. New England for a year and a half, then the Raiders, then Miami last year. In the past 2 seasons, one with the Raiders, one with Miami, Jack Jones has started 33 of 34 games. In total, he has 8 interceptions and 4 defensive touchdowns, and he's averaging about 52 tackles per year. This is a low-risk, moderately high-reward signing. 1 year, again, I don't know the parameters of the deal, but we're assuming it's relatively cheap, and he provides outside depth behind Demo and Green, and he could be ultimately a player and or potentially a draft pick that bumps Darrell Luter off the roster. It depends on how many cornerbacks the Niners are going to keep. Are they going to keep 5? Are they going to keep 6? If they keep 5 and Siran Neal stays on the roster, then he would be the de facto cornerback 6 because he plays special teams as well. But it's Demo, Green, Upton, Stout, Jack Jones, Hobbs, and Darrell Luter. And Hobbs obviously is your essentially backup nickel, but he can play outside as well. Niners aren't done here. Well, they got 6 corners. They're good. No, they could still look at the draft. There's still going to be undrafted rookie free agents. They're going to probably need to bring in maybe around 8 or 9 for training camp, right? For preseason games, scrimmages, etc. So, and they have other lower name or lower skilled cornerbacks on the roster, but I don't think they're done here also. But a good value signing when it comes to talent versus the cost. And I'm going to assume the cost is no more than $3 million. And we'll see when that actually gets revealed. And lastly, before we get into the draft and positions and players per round, there's been some chatter on social media, like there's chatter about everything on social media. The New York Giants defensive tackle Dexter Lawrence has made it known that he is requesting a trade. I'm sure this is going to work out between John Harbaugh and Dexter Lawrence. He's got 2 years left on his deal. He had a really down season last year and wants a new contract. Of course, though, when any fan of any team, but let's just stick with the Niners because we're Niner fans, here's a average player, good player, star player, wants a trade or has been released. Should the Niners sign him? Should the Niners trade for him? It could be a player with one eye, a peg leg, a hook for a hand, and riddled with E. coli. And people on social media will go, well, but should the Niners sign him? Now, I know it's a peg leg and a hook for an arm, but maybe that's worth a 6th round pick. People get ridiculous. The short answer to Derek Lawrence is no, they're not going to trade for him. He's 28 years old. He has a $27 million cap hit currently. It would take multiple picks and a new contract for Dexter Lawrence to come in. Now, that new contract would lower the cap hit this year, but then balloon in subsequent years. But they already traded for Osa, right? You're going to give up more. Now, they gave up a 3rd round pick this year. They only have 6 picks in this year's draft. The Giants are probably going to want multiple picks for Dexter Lawrence and say it's a pick this year and a pick next year. Now you're down another pick this year. But regardless of all that, I still maintain it's not good or financially sound or, to me, logical roster construction to have 2 extremely high-priced players at the same position. You bring Osa in, that closes the door on any other high-priced tackle. To me, it just does. Now, I'm not the arbiter of all things Niner roster related, but I will take my track record versus anybody else's I'm seeing on social media, content creators, or even folks in the media, legitimate media, when it comes to what this team should, could, and will do. And I've also seen trades like, well, hey guys, what about if they traded Brandon Ayuk in a pick for Dexter Lawrence? Yeah, because the Giants really want two receivers coming off of ACL tears. Remember, Malik Neighbors last year torn, and who knows what Brandon Ayuk's health situation is, considering he's been incommunicado, other than speeding by the stadium a couple months ago. They're not trading for Lawrence. Chances are Ayuk's not getting traded at all, whether it's to the Giants or the Commanders or whatever, unless the team gets really desperate in the summer. And again, hold on to him. He's an asset that can get you something, even if it's in a pick in next year's draft. Isn't a pick in next year's draft better than not getting an extra pick in next year's draft? It all depends on the situation and how, quote unquote, dire a team may need to give up, a pick. And Dontavian Wicks was traded, recently from the Packers to the Eagles, and he went for it was like a fifth this year and a sixth next year. Not to say that, if Dontavian Wicks can get, 2 picks, then Brandon Ayuk should get more than that. No. The contract has something to do with it, even though it really shouldn't when you think about it. And I've explained that in previous podcasts. As long as his contract fits into the 2026 salary cap, the team can trade for him, then rip it up and renegotiate with him a 1-year deal or a multi-year deal that's more palatable for both sides. But regardless, Niners made a signing at defensive end, signing at cornerback, and they are not trading for Dexter Lawrence. So let's pivot to the draft, y'all. And we are going to go through position by position who the Niners could take with their draft picks. And I'm going to limit it to 4 players per round because I don't want to go nuts. And I'm not one of those, I've watched tape on all these prospects that I'm going to talk to you about. I am not someone that is, spending hours upon hours upon hours on each prospect. That is just not my thing. To those that are doing it, awesome. I respect the hell out of you guys. You're doing God's work in terms of draft preparation. That's just not my thing. Between watching some tape and doing some mock drafts and understanding the Niners roster and what they need to accomplish in a draft where they do not have a 3rd round pick, which was given to Dallas for Osa, and they do not have a pick in the 5th, 6th, or 7th round. So they have a 1st, 2nd, and 4 fourths equals 6 picks total. And we know what the needs on the roster are, right? The biggest need is defensive end, and that's where we are going to start. And I'm going to start off each position to let you guys know that there is a financial component to this in terms of who the Niners could select in each round, or at least the 1st round. And it goes, and to me, I'm going to equate that to what are the top 10 defensive ends on average making in the NFL? And that answer is $36.7 million annually, average annually. It is a high value position, which I think the Niners, as we've seen since Lynch and Shanahan have been here, value that as a position that they want to target, whether it's DN or D tackle, in the 1st round. We know defensive end pass rush, and that could come from anywhere, as I've talked about, with Raheem Morris now being the defensive coordinator. I'm sure he's not going to just rely on the front 4. Even when Bosa and Michael are healthy, he's going to send more pressure than Robert Saleh and Steve Wilks and Nick Sorensen have done in the past 3 seasons. But we know defensive end, a speed rusher, is the biggest need, and they're going to address it, guys, in the first 2 rounds. If you see any mock drafts on social media where a defensive end is not drafted into the 4th, disregard the mock draft completely. It's not realistic. It's not going to happen at all. Round 1 or 2, a defensive end will be picked. I can promise you that. In the 1st round, now I'm not talking trade ups. I'm not prognosticating, the Niners can move up to mid-1st round and get this player, that player. I'm not doing that. Later on, I'm going to show you what a position could look like in the 3rd round, because the Niners do not have a 3rd round pick. And let me actually say this right now before we get into any of these players. I'm going to say it next week's podcast when it comes to the offense. Niners are picking 27. That means there are 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. I have to count on my fingers like a child. 5 teams behind them in the 1st round that, if they wanted to jump up to the Niners pick at 27, and the players the Niners were really targeting are gone, I would totally be okay. I would be more okay trading down in this draft and say staying in the 1st round or early in the 2nd round And getting back a third round pick, because I've done enough mock drafts, which at the end of the day mean nothing. And the draft always goes wildly different than really any of our mock drafts think that they're going to go. But the value to me of getting a third round pick in a draft where their huge needs are defensive end, left guard, and safety is, to me, I think, a great asset to have, because there's such a huge gap between their second round pick and their fourth round pick. That's not to say that they couldn't package up 2 fourth round picks to move into the third round, but now now you have one less pick in a draft that you have only 6 picks to start with. Excuse me. Hopefully it's not going to be a cough fest like last podcast. So in the first round, let's get back to defensive ends. DNs, that could be there for them at 27. First, Akeem Mesidor, Miami. 6'3", 270. He's an older prospect. He's 25 years old. 35.5 sacks at Miami, 12.5 last year. Anybody that's going to take him off the board because he's 25, don't. Anytime a player in the first round is drafted, say a quarterback, don't you hear draft experts or media people say, oh, they found their quarterback for the next 10 years. Slow the fuck down. Let's not worry about 10 years. Let's worry about them performing to get them through their first contract yet. And if the Niners feel like a 25-year-old rookie provides them with such great value and talent on the edge, but could potentially also kick inside as well, and when you get to the end of his contract, he's 29 or 30, and you want to give him a 2 or 3 year deal, you can. But if you can maximize his first contract, I don't care that he's 25 years old. I don't care at all. Sure, would 21 or 22 be better? Michael Williams came into the league at 2021? Sure. But if he's going to help you day one and for the next at least 3 or 4 years, you pull the trigger. You don't even think about age. Next, Zion Young out of Missouri, 6'5", 265, 11.5 sacks in total, 6.5 last year. Had a misdemeanor, well, maybe not a misdemeanor, but what was it? A DWI, DUI, not the end of the world, but the Niners should do some homework. It's not an unforgivable crime type of thing, but the Niners need to do their homework on any player that has issues. Remember, James Pierce, defensive end last year from Tennessee, went to the Falcons, was charged with multiple accounts. I don't know if it was like domestic battery or if I got that wrong, I apologize. Something. And that was the issue of Pierce coming out of Tennessee. Year 2, it's reared its ugly head. So Zion Young on the draft board till he's not. Next, TJ Parker out of Clemson, 6'3", 260, 21.5 sacks in total. 5 last year, had a better junior year than senior year, but still a talent. Uses hand well, has great bend, power, explosion. A lot of people saying he could fall out of the first round, and if he does, he could be, again, one of the players where if someone's looking to jump up, the Niners could be looking to trade back, but he could be, and in a lot of ways should be, a first-round pick, and he could be a target of San Francisco. And lastly, a player who has a top 30 visit with the Niners, Malachi Lawrence out of UCF, 6'4", 270, 20 sacks in total, 7 last year. So now all of these defensive ends, you're looking at, maybe 6'4"-ish, 260 plus. So I'm not going to say bigger defensive ends, but close to the more traditional DN mold, like a Nick Bosa. If we want to say Nick Bosa is a traditional DN mold, minus the 2 torn ACLs in the NFL and 1 in college. But these are players that maybe Mesidor goes earlier, but Young, Parker, Malachi Lawrence could very well be there at 27. And if they are, they're players that the Niners should take a long, hard look at. Now, let's go into the second round. Defensive ends. And some of these, because the Niners aren't picking again until the late 50s, early 60s. Some of these players may not be there, but let's just kind of go through them. One of the players I really like coming out And the Niners, it might not be there in the second round pick. Gabe Jacobs out of Illinois, 6'3", 270, 35 and a half sacks in his career in the Big Ten, 13 each of the last 2 years. He has NFL-ready pass rush hands, moves, and feet day one. Why he's not being talked about as a first-round pick is a bit, I don't want to say confusing, because again, I'm not diving into these prospects the way that obviously like a Mel Kiper or a lot of these dedicated fans and content creators that are all about the draft and the process and watching film are. But I don't think he's a player that lasts to the Niners pick in the bottom of the second round, but someone that has been super duper productive in college. And there's always like the trade-off, right? The moderate production in college, but you're projecting a jump to the pros versus the big time production in college, and you don't think that's going to be replicated in the NFL. I can understand if someone like Gabe Jacobs was playing at, a D1A school like a North Dakota State or the Sun Belt Conference, a player on a team that hasn't really been challenged by college players like that are in the ACC, SEC, Big Ten, right? But Gabe Jacobs isn't one of them, but I don't think he's going to last until the Niners pick in the second round. Cassius Howell, Texas A&M, 6'2", 248, 27 sacks in his career, 11 and a half last year, speed rusher. Now with these three, starting with Howell, now we're getting into maybe the smaller speed rusher types, similar to what Bryce Huff was before he retired, that could complement Bosa and these other bigger edge-setting defensive ends that the Niners have. Next, R. Mason Thomas from Oklahoma, 6'2", 250, 17 sacks in total, 6.5 last year. And lastly, and obviously there are probably like a handful more that you can throw into the second round that would be there, Derek Moore out of Michigan, 6'3", 260, 24.5 sacks in his career, 10.5 last year. Now, before we get to defensive tackles, one thing I'll say overall when it comes to the draft, if there's a player that you like, I understand the BPA philosophy, the best player available, but people change the definition to suit how they want to describe it. If at 27, the best player available is Ty Simpson or a running back, the Niner, like, was it Julian Love or the running back out of Notre Dame? They're not going to draft him. That might not be the best player available on the Niners board. It might be the best player available overall, but the whole, you got to fill all your needs in free agency, which is impossible to begin with because there's a salary cap. So you can go to the draft and draft BPA. I understand and I'm okay with the BPA argument at times. What I'm also okay with more so is reaching for a prospect, right? If you as a GM, a coach, believe a lot in a player, but and really like a player, and you don't think he's going to be there with your next pick, draft him. I don't care what Mel Kiper or the pundits say of, well, they drafted player X and I had him 20 spots, farther down on my board, and they could have drafted a different position because it would have been better value. I don't care about the value of the pick. I care about the value of the fit. And it doesn't mean just because defensive end, left guard, and free safety are the three biggest needs, you automatically draft those three positions with their first three available picks. No, because if there's no safety you want in the second round, you wait until the fourth round because they don't have a third round pick. I have never been a believer of, well, that was a reach. Now, there are some reaches, like we could say J.J. McCarthy for the Vikings was a reach. There's reaches in every draft, but if you really believe in a player and it's a position of need, and there's no guarantee you could trade up 5, 7, 10 picks later to get that player, you draft him. You draft him, and I'm totally okay with that. I'm off my soapbox now. I'm an N of one, but I believe in, if you believe, you pull the trigger, and the hell with and nobody cares about the outside noise anyway, right? But I don't think anybody should be scared of or hesitant to make a draft pick because there might be someone quote unquote rated higher either if it's on their board or some ridiculous media members board, who are going to be shouting from the rooftops that this team made the wrong pick. Don't believe that at all. Now, defensive tackles, the average salary of the top 10 DTs, defensive tackles in the league, $25 million annually. But I am not taking a defensive tackle in the first round after drafting Alfred Collins, CJ West, and bringing in Osa Odighizuwa in trade. They need a fourth defensive tackle. They need a fourth legitimate defensive tackle. It is not Evan Anderson or Sebastian Valdez. The only player in the first round that I would pause if he was available is Peter Woods from Clemson. 6'3", 315, had a better junior year than senior year, but the consensus best defensive tackle in the draft. If he drops, I think you think about it. And this is, even if he's the best player available on your board, defensive end is your biggest need, right? Your biggest need. And if you're bringing in a defensive tackle as part of this rotation, and not to say that Peter Woods wouldn't start ahead of Alfred Collins, I'm not saying that, but what kind of defensive tackle? Here's how I would look at it then. It's Peter Woods plus a DN in the second, or the DN you really want in the first, and the best available defensive tackle in the second. Which combination fits best for your team, your defensive scheme, with your personnel? Then I think you can lean towards that. And Peter Woods, I think, is one that would give pause. I wouldn't draft a defensive tackle in the second round. Personally, I would wait. I would wait until the fourth round. And I'm going to give 4 prospects. The first, and it depends on what the Niners want to do. Do they want a big body, run stuffing type of D tackle with some pass rush juice, or another penetrating D tackle like Osa? So first, let's go with the big bodies. Chris McClellan from Missouri, 6'4", 320. Or DeMonte Capehart from Clemson, 6'5", 315. Both players with long arms, can occupy blocks. They're not going to give you a whole lot in terms of pass rush, but could be early down defensive tackles. And this, again, was with any one of their 4 fourth-round picks. More of the pass rushing penetrators, Zane Durant at Penn State, 6'1", 290. Or Rayshawn Benny from Michigan, 6'3", 295. These are all 4 players. Well, I shouldn't say all 4, but these are 4 players that could be there when the Niners pick with any one of their 4 fourth-round picks. They need to address defensive line again. They have 2 young players in Collins and West. They have Osa under contract for this season and 2 more at $20 million per, solely salary, so they could release him if it doesn't work out, but we're all hoping that it does. But they need, I think, or they could use another fresh, young, rotational defensive tackle in this draft. Now, they only have 6 picks. If they were to trade down and get an extra pick, it makes the defensive tackle pick more of, I don't want to say a luxury, and I don't want to call it an absolute need, because you could pick up a defensive tackle in free agency. You can get an undrafted rookie free agent that surprises you. But I think there's the talent in this draft is in the middle rounds to me. Rounds 1 and 2, early rounds, 6 and 7, late rounds. So 3, 4, and 5 are the middle rounds. Unfortunately, the Niners don't have a pick in the 3rd or the 5th round, but I think they can make 4, if they stay with 4 fourth-round picks, 4 solid additions to their team in the 4th. Now let's move to linebackers. Top 10 average annual salary of $15.4. The Niners in no way, shape, or form should address linebacker in the 1st or 2nd. In the 4th, I could. Now, linebacker is a position that on defense, if they forgoed during the draft, I'd be fine with it, because they have Warner and Winters and Nick Martin and Garrett Wallow and Luke Gifford. Obviously, if I didn't mention Greenlaw first, I apologize. They got 6 linebackers on the roster already. And again, I'm sure there's going to be undrafted rookie free agents coming in, and Jalen Graham's on the team still, who's, again, going to be destined for the practice squad for another season. But the other way you can look at this is Dre Greenlaw, D. Winters, and Garrett Wallow all are on 1-year deals. So if you draft somebody, and we don't want to forget about Nick Martin, he shouldn't be buried or thrown out into the trash. They obviously thought highly enough of him to draft him in the 3rd round. It's just a matter of when can he get out in the field. Now that Dre Greenlaw is back, D. Winters is probably linebacker 3. So at best, Martin is linebacker 4. But if you're going to have 3 linebackers be free agents after this season, they can take a look at someone like in the 4th round, Caleb Elarms Orr from TCU, 6'2", 230, can play sideline to sideline, can cover well, shed blocks okay, good tackler. Kyle Lewis from Pittsburgh, 6', 225, smaller linebacker, not much smaller than Dre Greenlaw, fast, can cover, but not the biggest guy, right? Not the biggest guy in terms of attacking, getting downhill, taking on offensive linemen. Harold Perkins Jr. from LSU, 6'1", 220, tore his ACL in 2024, played well last year. Could be an interesting, given his athleticism, his athletic profile, an interesting multi-year fit next to Fred Warner. And lastly, Aiden Fisher out of Indiana, 6'1", 235, more potentially traditional Mike linebacker, but could also be a long-term teammate or tandem with Fred Warner. Going back, I said they could forego linebacker in the draft completely. I'd be okay with it. But again, the 4th round, here are 4 players that they could potentially take. Now, cornerback, we talked about it. They have 6 in Demo, Green, Stout, Hobbs, Jones, and Luter. Top 10 average for cornerbacks going into this season, $24.5 million. If you can find yourself a good corner, cheap on a 4-year rookie deal, you do it. But I'm not addressing cornerback in the 1st or 2nd round. I don't care who's there. You have your starters. It's Demo, Green, and Stout. You have your starters, and you brought in presumably players you feel really good about in Hobbs at backup nickel and at Jack Jones behind your outside corners. Darrell Luter is, I don't want to say the wild card, but he could be pushed off the roster. Hobbs, Jones, and Luter, the bottom 3, if you want to call it the bottom 3 corners on the roster, all have 1-year deals. So again, this is another avenue where I think the Niners can bring in someone young to help offset the potential losses coming up after this season. And I would only address corner in the 4th round. This entire up to cornerbacks, I haven't mentioned the 3rd round at all yet. And that is purposeful. Because again, I think there's value to be had in that 3, 4, 5 range. Just so happens that the 4th round is smack in the middle of the 3rd and 5th, and the Niners have 4 picks to play with. Who could they look at? Hezekiah Masses from Cal, nearby, 6'1", 185, 7 interceptions in his career, 5 last year. Devin Moore out of Florida, 6'3", 200 pounds, 5 interceptions in his career, 2 last year with the Gators. Dalen Everett with that very good Georgia Bulldog defense, 6'1", 190, 5 picks overall, 1 last year. And a small school player, Charles Demings from Stephen F. Austin, 6'1", 190, 8 picks in his career, 4 last year. The one commonality I have with these 4th round picks is I'm not drafting anybody small. I want them 6'1" and up, a bigger boundary corner that's got ball skills. Everything really on the Niners defense was suspect last year. Pass rush was terrible. Couldn't get turnovers, couldn't get interceptions. Tackling during some games was not nearly where it needed to be. You have Demo for 3 more years, I think. It could be 4. Green for 2 more seasons. Stout for 3 more seasons, including this one. But it's Hobbs, Jones, and Luter who are gone potentially after the season. I think one of these players bringing in more youth in the secondary to potentially, if it's just pushing Darrell Luter off the roster, I hate to say that that's a win because I don't know anything about Darrell Luter. Maybe a really good guy, but it brings someone potentially with a comparable skill set that's on a rookie cost-controlled 4th round contract, which is going to be about $1 million a year, without having to up someone like a Darrell Luter, which I don't think they would anyway. So 4 corners that they can target in the 4th round. Now let's finish up, guys, with safety. Top 10 average of safeties in the NFL, $18.4 million. Safety is in the running in the 1st or 2nd round. It is. Again, we haven't talked anything about offense yet. That's going to be next week. Safety is in the running if the right safety falls to them. It's got to be a ball hawking center fielder that can play split safeties, but can play single high as well. Dylan Thieneman of Oregon can do that. 6 foot 205, 8 interceptions in his career, 2 last year with the Ducks. I think he's going to be gone by 27, and I'm not figuring or saying, that they can trade up for him, that they can, but he's a 1st round safety. Emmanuel McNeil-Warren of Toledo. I know a lot of people on social media are getting excited about him. 6'2", 180, 5 interceptions over his career, 2 last year. From what I've watched, he is more of a he's a long, because he's 6'2", 180. He's got to, I think, put on a little bit more weight, a little bit more muscle, but he feels more like he's better playing with stuff in front of him. Not that he's a box safety, but pretty decent run support. I think he has good ball awareness and skills for things 15 yards from the line of scrimmage and in. I don't know if he really fits the mold of you can put him back 20 yards and let him be your center fielder. I wouldn't be pissed if McNeil-Warren was the pick, but I think there are better fits at safety than he is. But those two are potentially first round worthy, and I'm not even sure if Thieneman falls to San Francisco. 2nd round, A.J. Halsey of LSU, 6 foot, 220, 10 picks in his career, 3 last year with the Tigers. And Genesis Smith of Arizona, they're Big Ten now, Arizona? Or ACC, one of those two, 6'2", 200, 5 interceptions, 1 last year. Both of these two players, explosive athletes. Fluid hips, run, I don't want to say blazing, but really fast 40s. Halsey has better ball skills than Genesis Smith, but again, the ability to play from depth. Both Halsey better tackler than Genesis Smith. I'm looking for the next Merton Hanks. Merton Hanks wasn't the best tackler in the world, right? You don't need to have a thump. If you have a thumper, you generally don't have a ball hawk. That combination is rare, not impossible, but rare. They have their thumper in Mustafa. They have someone in between in Marquise Siegel. If the Niners don't address safety, it's probably going to be Jair Brown as your center fielder. How does everybody feel about that? Not great. And I don't think Raheem Morris or Kyle Shanahan feels great about that. There are still safeties on the market they could bring in, but nobody that I think would move into that single high role, and it's probably going to fall to Jair Brown, which is not a good thing. So in the 2nd round, A.J. Halsey and Genesis Smith options. Now I'm including the 3rd round here because I want to show you a couple players that I like, or tell you a couple players that I like that would not be there in the 4th round. I highly doubt it. So if there's a situation that the Niners can trade back or trade up into the 3rd round, you can get someone like Jalen Kilgore from South Carolina, 6'1", 210, 8 picks in his career, 2 last year. Been described as a glue guy that could really unite the secondary. Can play down, can cover tight end, can cover the slot, can play from depth. Good tackler. Bud Clark from TCU, 6'2", 190, 15 interceptions in his career with the Horned Frogs, 3 last year. The ultimate ball hawk, the ultimate center fielder, not wildly physical, not a great tackler and run support, but I don't care if you have 10 other players on your team that are good tacklers in front of you. I want you to be able to lock down a tight end, cover a slot receiver pretty well, and patrol the deep middle of the field for anything else. Deep middle, deep moderate for anything else. Bud Clark can do that. Now, if you want to reach and take Clark or Kilgore in the 2nd round, go ahead. Because again, if you're not planning on trading back or trading up into the 3rd round, I don't consider it a reach. If the player fits your system and fills a need and is going to enhance your defensive approach and scheme, I don't call that a reach. You are definitely getting the player you want by drafting him maybe earlier than you thought you would, or a lot of people thought he would go, versus hoping and praying you can get to him later because you can't control if another team wants to trade with you. And lastly, if the Niners do not trade into the third round, in the fourth, you could look at Lewis Moore from the national champion Indiana Hoosiers, 5'11", 200 pounds, 9 interceptions in his career, 6 last year with Indiana, or Michael Taffy from Texas, a walk-on who wound up being an All-American, 6 foot, 190, 7 interceptions with Texas, and 2 last year. So what does this all mean? Where does it all net out? I have no idea. We are just going over defense today. We're going to go over offense next week. But the only thing that I can say with a good amount of certainty is that of their first 2 picks, defensive end will be addressed. That's not to say that they can't find a viable defensive end in the fourth, or if they trade up into the third, or trade into the third, trade down, trade up, whatever. But first-round picks are usually first-round picks for a reason, right? Is there a time when a second, third, or fourth outplays a first? Sure. Happens every draft. But I don't think the Niners, a team that puts such an emphasis on their front four, will go past the second round to draft a defensive end. I do think there's the possibility, and I would be a big fan of it, of trading down into the first or out of the first completely if the players they're targeting, wherever it may be, defense, offense, whatever, are not there, and there's still a handful of other, if you want to call them backup players, backup plans, whatever it may be, that they feel good that they can get one of those players by trading down, you do it. I don't care so much about staying in the first round for the 5th-year option. I really don't. If you know by after year 3 that this is a player that's performed and you want to keep, then you extend them. The 5th-year option is nice for well, I'm not sure yet. Let's see. But it locks you into a certain amount of money. Fortunately for San Francisco, if they stay in the first round, they're picking so late that guaranteed annual amount for a 27th overall pick for year 5 is not that prohibitive at all. But I think I would love to see, honestly, D-end in the first or second, and the wild card is going to be wide receiver. Who's available in the first, who's available in the second for the Niners potentially to draft. But that is a conversation for next podcast, which might be next weekend, but I'm going to try to make it sometime during the week. Next podcast, we'll talk about the same exercise for offensive players. Then the podcast after that will be my official mock draft for the Niners as we steamroll towards, April 23rd? That is the first round. Yeah, Thursday, April 23rd as the first round of the draft. And that podcast might be Monday, the 20th. But that's going to conclude the podcast for today. Like always, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to make us part of your listening or viewing routine. Whatever you guys are doing between now and when we speak again, stay happy, healthy, and safe, faithful. We will talk soon. Take care.